Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm super excited to see you all. That's fantastic. So I'm going to launch a little poll. So if you want to tell us a little bit where you're from, where have you joined us? So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We've only got 3 questions. So if you could tell us whereabouts in the world you are, what your background is, and if you're part of the LGBTIQ+ community. Thank you. Come on, let's get physical. I can't sing. This is really good. Welcome very much for joining. So we've got a range of people. Oh, we've got people from the Middle East and North Africa. A friend of mine who used to work for the British Council in Saudi shared it really widely within her network. That's fantastic. That's so good. So mostly people from the UK and the EU. 21% from the MENA region. Marhaba. Ahlan wa sahlan. And Australasia, feel free to tell us in the chat whereabouts in Australasia you are from. That's fantastic. Also, we've got 20% students so far. 67 people, 67% working in the education sector. We've got some authors, some parents, librarians, historian, archive researchers, and 67 identify as being part of the LGBTIQA+ community. That's fantastic. This is so good. So we'll start in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for everybody to arrive. So if you're not familiar with a Zoom webinar, you can put in the chat whereabouts you are in the world. We've just put the regions, haven't we? I'm very interested in the people in the other countries. I'm based in London in the UK. Where are you, Mike?
I'm in London as well, London, UK.
Fantastic. We've got people joining us from quite a few regions of the world. That's so great. Oh, North America, welcome. So we've got blind delegates registered. Hi, Charlotte from Brighton. Nisreen, excited to be here. I'm excited to hear you. Kuwait, ahlan wa sahlan, marhaba bik. Zahra, kif halak? That's fantastic. Geneva. So is it the French, the German, or Italian? Turkey. Nasser Sinez, how are you? My Turkish is so basic. Bonjour, guten Tag, Pittsburgh, USA. That's fantastic. That's so great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. That's really, really great. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the fourth Pride in Education conference. So I'm super, super excited to see that we are growing and growing and growing, which is absolutely brilliant. And you've all had a look at the program today. I just have to say that we're very sorry, but one of the speakers is unwell and wasn't available to join us, Valentino. So they will be in the next conference. So we'll finish a little bit earlier today. Rome, Brittany, Berlin based. So buonasera, guten Abend. I'm just showing off the few words that I know in the languages. Very good. So Mike, we're going to start in about a minute. So thank you very much. So I'm just going to close the poll and share the results with everyone. So as you can see, we've mostly got people from the UK, 63%, but we've also got North America, European Union, Middle East and North Africa, the African Sub-Saharan region. That's fantastic, Australasia. Most of you are either students or educators, and 63% identify as being part of the LGBTIQA+ community. So thank you very much. So I'd like to thank Zoom and Pearson and My G-Work for the support that they've given us over the years with the Pride in Education conference. Zoom is phenomenal, and I'm super, super, super excited to hear what Mike has in store. Thank you, Mike, and welcome. So before we start, I just want to introduce myself for the benefit of people who are visually impaired. I've got curly brown hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing headphones, and I got a black top and a black necklace. There you go.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Laila. It's so good to be here. Welcome to everyone. We are so proud and happy to support Pride in Education. So my name is Mike Adams from Zoom. I'm based in London in the UK. I identify as he, him, his. And today we're going to talk about how Zoom can help you in your day-to-day classroom, in your day-to-day education environment. How can you use Zoom in the best possible way to have a really exciting and engaging learning experience for you and for your students. And we're also going to talk about some of the innovations which Zoom have brought to the table in the last couple of months. So we're always innovating, trying to help the learning experience be as good as it can be. So I'm the partner manager for Zoom. I look after lots of Zoom partners across Europe. And I'm also the Zoom Pride leader, which is our internal employee group for people who identify as LGBTQ+, or also for allies, with many allies at Zoom, who want to support our community and make the world a better place by using Zoom technology to empower teachers, educators, students, and obviously LGBT+ charities around the world. So today we're going to talk really about all the different schools and how schools are using Zoom today in the best possible way. Now, just for your information, there's already more than 125,000 schools around the world who are using Zoom. That's schools and universities, of course, so education organizations. It's quite impressive. We have a lot of experience working with educators, students, and teachers to deliver the best possible learning experience. And really, Zoom has built an entire platform specifically for education. And so on the slide, I'm showing some examples of ways you can use Zoom in your education environment. So obviously you can use it for classes and guest lectures. You can use it to share content with your students. You can also record classrooms and training sessions, which you can then share with your students afterwards, or offer an on-demand learning experience. Zoom also offers video breakout rooms. That means you can do smaller student groups can collaborate with each other and then bring them back to the main classroom. You can also offer online classes, of course, with remote learning. And clearly that's been the majority of schools and universities during the last 18 months. And then student-to-student collaboration. So students often need to work on homework together from home. So again, Zoom is a perfect tool for that. And then staff meetings for a school or university over here, collaborate with other universities and schools, so to share projects or do maybe training sessions together, work groups for professors, training for your staff, study groups. So again, there's so many ways you can use Zoom really for the entire end-to-end education experience. And we are here to help you and support you every step of the way. So just think about all the creative ways you could use Zoom to help you in all the different use cases you have today for collaboration. Now let's talk about some of the main education features which you can use in your day-to-day classroom with your students. So one really interesting one, Zoom just launched very recently. This was just announced in literally in September, like a month ago. So this is very new. And we call this Zoom Events. So Zoom Events is an entirely new all-in-one events platform, which allows you to create virtual experiences which attendees will love because it's a great user experience. So the idea is with one single web page, you can set up your event agenda and registration so people can register for free sessions or paid sessions as well if you want to monetize your content. It's all on one single platform, which is the platform you already use for all your video sessions. You already all know Zoom, of course, for classrooms. So now you can use that same Zoom experience also for the entire event management. So you can do a multi-track event with multiple speakers, multiple sessions, maybe even a multi-day event or conference. So you can really build all of that with the Zoom Events platform. So this is a big revolution to help you create an entire day of conferences or meetings, or have a more detailed agenda with multiple speakers. And then another innovation we just launched in the Zoom platform, which is really great. If you're a teacher with lots and lots of unruly students, students often want to kind of joke with each other, and it can be very distracting if you want them to pay attention. So we launched a specific mode just for education called focus mode. What that means is that the teacher can see all the students have their camera turned on, and the teacher can see all of them on their screen. However, the students cannot see each other. The students can only see the teacher's face. And that makes a huge difference in their level of attention to make sure the students are actively engaged in what the teacher is saying, instead of distracting each other by playing jokes with their cameras, right? So this is a game changer in education, right? And it's available right now for every Zoom user. So this is great for teachers, really. I would call it teacher mode, right? We call it focus mode, but it's really a teacher mode. Great. So we just launched that. So another interesting one, to make sure your students feel more engaged with each other, is what we call immersive scenes. What it is now, if you look at a traditional Zoom meeting, you see all the people, all the participants are in rectangles on your screen. And so it looks like you're still all remote from each other. With immersive scenes, we create one single virtual scene where everyone appears as if they were sitting next to each other. And this background image can look like a classroom, as you can see on the picture right here. It looks like a virtual classroom, but you can use any picture you want. It doesn't have to be a classroom. It could be a forest if you're talking about nature, animals. Could be a spaceship if you're talking about astronomy or astrology or anything like that. Could be a museum, could be any image you want, but just create the illusion that the students are actually physically there with each other in the same environment. And this really creates a completely different meeting experience and learning experience for students and teachers. So this is absolutely great. And again, it's available right now to all our users. Another really interesting feature to get your students to pay more attention is to really produce your classroom as if it was a TV show, where the presenter, the teacher in this case, is actually in front of the slides. So instead of having your PowerPoint slides on one side of the screen and the face of the teacher on the other side of the screen, the teacher is actually on top of the slides. It's like you're inside of your slides. And so you appear as if you're literally on top of your slides. It looks like you're a TV presenter presenting the news, right? You've got literally the content behind you. You can even point with your finger at specific items on the screen. You can move yourself around, you can resize yourself. And again, it just creates a completely different experience for the students, where they're going to pay much more attention. It's much more exciting, it's more dynamic, and it creates that TV-like experience. And students really love it. They're always excited. For them, it looks like a magic show, like you're doing a magic trick, right? And that's a good thing. Like, you want your students to be engaged. And you can simply go to the next slide by clicking on a small arrow at the bottom of the screen, and you're fully resizable as well on your screen. So really, slides virtual background is one of these really neat tricks that every teacher can use. And this is available right now for every Zoom user.
I love it. Love it.
Absolutely. It's a great feature. Another really nice way to for your students to be able to follow what you're saying is what we call live transcription. So Zoom is using speech-to-text recognition to recognize what you are saying and automatically transcribe it into live subtitles. So we use language recognition, sound recognition, to transcribe it into text. It's a bit like automatic subtitles, if you want. And this is absolutely great for students who are hard of hearing, or also for them to pay more attention, or if they didn't hear what you said, they can read it on the screen. It really helps the whole learning experience. And this is, again, free of charge to all our customers. And today we only support English. It's the only language we support at the moment. We will add more languages next year, so stay tuned for other languages. But for English, it's available right now. And you can scroll back and forth on the subtitles if you missed something. And you also have a full transcript of the class afterwards, so you can read back what was said at the beginning of the class. So again, this is a great tool for students to be more engaged in your learning experience. I really recommend you use this. Now, if you start recording lots of your classrooms, you're going to end up with lots and lots of recorded training sessions, lots of recorded classes. The problem is, how do you manage all of these recordings? Well, the good news is there are lots of third-party tools available in the education sector to manage virtual recordings. There's a few examples here on the slide. One is called here Canvas, you've got Moodle, you've got so many of them, right? And I'm sure you know many of the Blackboard. I'm sure you know lots of these tools already. You probably already use them. Well, the good news is Zoom can integrate into all these third-party platforms, so that all the recorded Zoom meetings or training sessions you record can then be managed by those platforms, right? To create a kind of mini YouTube-like experience for your students with all of your classrooms and trainings, which are of course searchable. So this is really important, your learning management platform, how Zoom can integrate into that. Now, another big part of any classroom is of course security. It's very important to make sure you don't have any outside intruders in your classroom, or if your students are being, disrespectful or noisy or making a mess in your class, you want to be able to block them from annotating, for example, etc. So we want to make it really easy for teachers and educators to immediately have access to all the security features. So what Zoom has done is to put a security icon directly on the user interface for the teacher, for the host of the meeting. So if you're in a Zoom, on a Zoom call, on a desktop session, there's a security icon right here in the interface. And when you click on this icon, you can immediately block the students from annotating, for example, remove all the annotation, or you can block someone from entering the meeting, you can lock the meeting down, you can throw someone out, you can report someone if there's been some inappropriate behavior, etc. So this is really a way for the teacher to feel in control, to make sure there's no security breach, or to make sure the students are not unruly in your class. And we have the same security icon also in our Zoom Room product, which is our classroom product. So really, this is essential if you want to manage the security of your classrooms in the best possible way, one click away. Make it really easy and accessible. Now, another important part for security is that video waiting room. So the video waiting room means that you can see who's waiting to enter the virtual classroom. And the teacher can one by one admit all the students one by one. So if some unknown person wants to enter the classroom, you can see who they are, you see their camera, you can block them before they even enter. So you get that level of control, right? So let's talk about classrooms, physical classrooms, when you actually, teach not virtually, but you're actually in a classroom, your students in front of you in person. Now, most classrooms need to accommodate some remote students because we live in a world where it's all hybrid. It's in between physical and remote. There's always a mix of both. So how do you redesign classrooms to accommodate that hybrid learning environment with students who are in person in the classroom, but also remote teachers and remote students? And Zoom can really help you there. So Zoom has built a classroom experience we call Zoom Rooms. So Zoom Rooms is an entire new user interface specially designed for classrooms. So this is not just a laptop PC. This is an entire classroom user experience with a little touch screen in the middle of the classroom where the teacher with one single click can control the classroom. Now, what does the classroom look like? Well, one important part of a classroom is for the teacher to be easily allowed to share the presentation to the big screen on the wall, the projector. And so every Zoom room has a built-in instant wireless sharing. That means that as soon as the teacher enters the classroom, the laptop of the teacher will detect the classroom automatically, and with one single click, you share your presentation to the projector without any configuration, no password, it's all instantaneous. So really make it easy for your teachers, for yourselves to be able to share content. Now, what does those classrooms actually look like? Well, there's a few different ways you can design that hybrid classroom. And again, we use the word hybrid here to mean it's physically in-person students and also some remote students. So one way to do it for a school would be to have a small system here on wheels, like a trolley, like a cart on wheels with a big screen and a built-in bar on top with a camera, microphone, and speaker, all built in. Another way to design your classroom is for a university, for example, to have a fixed system where you've got, maybe your trolley here is on wheels, but you've got a fixed camera and microphone and speakers built into the ceiling and walls of the university. Another way to design it would be to have a more kind of high-end system for a classroom we've got multiple displays. We've got 2 displays behind the teacher and 2 displays in front of the teacher so they can see the remote students while they're actually teaching, right? So again, there's lots of different classroom designs you can use, but it's always using the same Zoom Room user interface. So very, very easy for the teacher to control the class. So I hope today's session was useful. I hope you were inspired to use Zoom in new ways for your remote learning experience. We are always listening to feedback. We love your feedback. Everything we do at Zoom is to have happy customers, happy teachers, happy students. And so if you have any ideas to improve our product, suggestions, feedback, we listen. If you have a suggestion box, just go to zoom.us/feed. You can provide any product feedback and we will listen and incorporate all your suggestions into the next version of our product. So with that, there's a few resources I would recommend you check out on our website, which is zoom.us. We have a specific page dedicated to education, which is zoom.us/education, where we have lots of case studies, best practices, ideas, suggestions for teachers and students. So this will really help you in your day-to-day job as a teacher. So I really recommend you check out this website, really, really good. With that, I'll open up for a very short Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? I hope this session was useful. I hope you learned a few new tricks you might have not known about. So thank you very much.
Joe is saying, thanks, interesting. I haven't kept up with new features. I like the feature that allows you to put yourself in front of the presentation and move yourself around. I agree, Joe. Joe works in ESOL, English to speakers of other languages, supporting refugees, migrants, and people seeking asylum. And we often, in ESOL pre-pandemic, had a lot of difficulties reaching, so for example, a mother with a newborn who couldn't attend the class and couldn't get access to childcare. So I think this hybrid system is the future. And as a teacher myself, I think it's absolutely phenomenal how it keeps on improving, and I'm always learning. So I'm part of the further education family, and we talk about lifelong learning for our learners, but this is really a good example of lifelong learning for the teacher. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, so this feature is called Slides as Virtual Background. That's the official name for it. And again, it's very, very easy to use. In the Zoom interface, it's just 2 clicks away. Very, very easy. Slides as virtual background. I really recommend it. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments?
Angela is saying that she loves this. Marzia is saying poor students, I think, talking about the hybrid model. No, I think it was the teacher.
No, that was the focus mode, where the students cannot see each other anymore, which means they cannot play jokes on each other anymore or play jokes on the teacher.
Which is good, actually, especially for you.
Probably a good thing.
which may have difficulties concentrating. That's absolutely brilliant. Marisa said exactly. Yes, thank you so very, very much. I'm super excited and really, really grateful for all the work that Zoom does. Oh, we've got a question in the Q&A. What other languages are planned for live transcription?
So we're planning about 12 additional languages. The exact list of languages is on our blog, on blog.zoom.us. I don't remember them top of my head, so I'm giving you a vague answer there. But if you go to blog.zoom.us and just search for languages, you will see the list there. Yeah.
Thank you. Gaia says the focus mode sounds great for university with lots of students haven't put their camera on as they are shy. Yeah, it's true. Very good.
Absolutely. So again, if they're shy, they probably don't want to show their face to all the other students, but the teacher obviously wants to see if they're paying attention, if they've got any issues. So I think that's something that the teacher can share with the students, say, hey, with this focus mode, no one else will see you, just me as a teacher. So you keep your privacy, but we can still have a proper engaged experience. So I think it's great. Absolutely.
Yeah. Bhavna is saying, I love the pronouns field in the profile settings. Yeah, me too. This is so inclusive. Yeah. Angela says, agreed, the students feel uncomfortable, shy being on screen. It's hard to teach to a black screen. Yeah, nice, fantastic. I have to say, every time I use Zoom, I discover something new, which I love it. Yeah. And Mike showed me how to use the incorporating the PowerPoint with your picture, and I'm going to have fun. I'm going to experiment with that. So thank you so very much, Mike. So
it's been my absolute pleasure, and we're so proud and happy to support this event. Pride in Education. We're very happy using our technology. And then for next year's event, obviously you'll be using Zoom events. So you'll have even the ticketing system of Zoom events to register for the event, which will be an even smoother experience. So that's very
I'm
exciting.
really, really looking forward to the virtual lobby where people can meet and have a chat. And yeah, I'm going to experiment with it. Thank you so very much, Mike. Thank you.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you. So the next speaker is, Laura Rose. I'm just going to find Laura Rose. She couldn't be with us, unfortunately, but she has sent us a pre-recorded video, and she represents an organization called LGBT Mummies Tribe. So we've got a very, very short video explaining who they are and what they do.
IUI and IVF. Hi everyone, my name is Laura Rose and I'm one of the founders of the LGBT Mummies Tribe. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a lesbian mother of 3 children via IUI and IVF. I am a white person with long black hair and black fringe and have blue eyes. I'm explaining this because there will be people attending that will be visually impaired, and throughout my presentation and keynote speech, I will be explaining some of the imagery that is actually in the PowerPoint presentation. So I'll just share my screen for you, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about understanding and supporting LGBT+ families in education. So this screen is black, as are all of the other screens in the presentation, with 3 circles across the top with a white background, and they have our cartoon LGBT Mummies Tribe images of people of different ethnicities in different coloured t-shirts, holding hands, holding children, babies, or hearts on their bellies, and there's one of a brown person with a pregnancy test. Who are the LGBT Mummies Tribe? So we are a global organisation that works to educate, share and celebrate LGBT+ women and people on the path to motherhood and parenthood. We act as a central source of support and a safe haven for people through providing information, guidance, resources and support groups on the available routes to starting a family through our website and social channels. And we're really passionate about making positive change and working directly with the NHS, government and other organisations to create policy change and support to ensure equality and inclusivity for LGBT+ women and people through healthcare and associated services. And we work tirelessly to inspire LGBT+ women and people worldwide on their quest to motherhood or parenthood, whilst working to utilise our families in society and create a more inclusive and supportive future for our children. Now I say utilise rather than normalise, hate the word normalise, utilise to see our families in everyday life. This image again has a black background, 3 white circles with grey around the outside, with our cartoon characters of people with different ethnicities in long, different coloured t-shirts, holding babies' hands or with children or partners. So just to explain, our families are consistently othered, and there's no tick box for us throughout society, healthcare and in education. So we want you to help our children and our families feel part of your teaching, and this is some of the ways you can do that. There's so many different types of families in our community. It's a myriad of amazing and beautiful people, and it can be sometimes difficult for educators, whether you be in a school setting or no other education setting, to understand that and support the children that come into your classrooms or your settings. So why is the education setting so important? Learned behaviour, whether it be through parents, friends, family, outside social settings, can be addressed in the school setting at an early age. When they're addressed, that then learned behaviour can lead to acceptance rather than discrimination or stereotypes, which a lot of us are subjected to. It can shape a child's views, and it can also help to educate parents, and creates a safe space for LGBT+ children who are either coming out or having feelings that they don't feel accepted or they feel different to other people, and LGBT+ families. It shows acceptance to the school community and celebrates diversity, and it shows a lack of tolerance for discrimination. Creates equality in education that is wholly heteronormative, and visibility and representation of our families, and it works to eradicate bullying thereof. The screen again is black with 4 circles this time, white background with grey around them, and again multiple different cartoons of different people from the community in long tees that are different colours and they're all different ethnicities. Language is so important, and our community, speak to anyone, will explain how crucial, triggering and sometimes traumatic it can be if it's used in the wrong way. So there are so many different ways that you can approach language. So you can use gender neutral language, so talking about parents or partners, or you can use heteronormative in general terms. So you could say mums, dads, parents, mother, father, parent, carer. Or you can refer to a person, your child, education, your parents or pupil. Whatever way suits you best or within your education setting, you need to ensure that it's streamlined across. How? So look at LGBT plus children's books. There's a myriad of them on our website. There's a whole list of different books that you could purchase or you can make available for your students or your pupils. Refer to different families or people. There's different families, whether it be one mum or person by choice, two mums or dads, or two parents or co-parents or polyfamilies. There's so many different types of families out there within our community, and people and pupils need to understand that all of them need to be accepted and supported. Make it age appropriate. A lot of these books they're very basic. They're not about going into real detail. Sometimes they are, and that's appropriate for some people and some educational environments. But if you want age appropriate information, it is out there. Talk to families in your school community. There may be LGBT plus families within your settings that you can support and get a bit of understanding of how they feel on their journey in path to parenthood. Staff education you can access through Stonewall, Schools Out, or even speak to us, which we provide. And LGBT plus role model speakers like diversity role models are fantastic for sending people with lived experience into the school or education setting. LGBT plus resources, get those, Stonewall, those other companies I talked about, and tackle stereotypes and discrimination. Talk about what kind of people think that we are. You know, what do two mums look like? What do two dads? And what does a trans parent look like? And tackle those stereotypes and just unpick them and get people to understand that we're all different and we're not all stereotypically the way people think we are. Discuss language use. It's so important at a young age to speak to people to understand that's so gay in the playground or in the education setting isn't appropriate, but explain why and explain the impact it can have. Explaining that someone has two mums, if a person or child doesn't understand, having that age appropriate conversation can really lead to new learned behaviour, which leads to acceptance, which is a positive outcome for everyone. And teach open questioning. It's about, can I ask, is it okay? Tell me more about your family. I'm really interested. I want to educate myself. Again, this is a page with black background, 4 circles with the same cartoon characters of all different ethnicities, smiling and either holding hands with children or in multicoloured t-shirts. The objectives of this support and what we need from educators. It's support for LGBT plus families, and it provides a safe and inclusive space at a really early age and throughout education. It gives more positive pupil experiences for children from heterosexual families and our families. And it teaches acceptance and it creates allies in education. It shows acceptance to LGBT plus children that they are part of the community, they are part of your classrooms, they are part of the setting, and they have that acceptance of who they are and who their parents and their families are. And it supports and empowers teachers and educators like all yourselves, people that really want to learn and educate themselves better, support the people that you're supporting so that you can do a better job. And that leads to better staff retention also. It's about inclusion, it's not about erasure, it's not about erasing heterosexuals, changing the language so no one's included. It's about including people that are a marginalised group of people, a community that really needs to be listened to, heard and supported, not discriminated against consistently. And it assists in the mental well-being of pupils and their families because they feel respected, they feel they're understood and they're visible. So be the change in education. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and challenge your school's language if you feel it's not appropriate or doesn't feel inclusive to you. We will appreciate your effort and ask those open questions. Sometimes people will say that they don't feel it appropriate, they don't want to share, and that's people's privacy, and that's absolutely fine. But at least it shows willing and good intent that you really want to educate yourself and better support people. Ask people's pronouns when you meet. They may not use them, they may do, and they'll appreciate that. And explain you're working really hard to be an ally. You can start with, I may get this wrong, so I apologise in advance. Shows good intent. And educate yourself, don't just rely on us. Read, research, Google, find out really good resources, books, research papers. follow organisations, LGBT plus organisations like Stonewall, ourselves, and other ones that can support. Listen to lived experiences. The best thing we always say is to listen to people, that they can tell you how they feel, how things have impacted them, what language does to them. And then that way you can attempt to understand the difficulties that as a community we go through and how you can support that to make that better. Look at other schools that are excelling. If there are other schools that you can see or educations that are really doing well, ask them, what did you do different? How did you do it? And what kind of impact did it make? And speak up against discrimination. If you see a need for change, be a real ally. It's not just about saying you're an ally, it's about actively being an ally. Again, this is another black page with 2 white circles, and in the image, they have people that look confused with question marks and speech bubbles, and then another person at the bottom with their thumbs up in a green t-shirt. So be an ally, be the change and educate the future. If we start off when people are really, really young and do it throughout education, then we're really going to tackle discrimination and stereotypes and supporting families like ours so that they feel usualised, they feel involved in the school community or educated community. Our details are there and Lila will share them with you. If anyone feels that they want to speak to us further, apologies that we can't be there today. It's unfortunate that with family illness, so we won't be able to. So if there's any questions, you can forward them over to Lila or you can directly email us. We'll happily speak to you. Educate, share and celebrate. That's what we're all about and we're here to support you.
Thank you so very, very much. I'm sorry you can't be live with us at the conference, but what a fantastic keynote to launch the conference. And a lot of the elements that you're mentioning in your presentation are actually covered throughout the conference. So age appropriate resources will be there and stuff. Just before we go, what would you say has been the biggest challenge for your organization and the biggest win?
Biggest challenge is that people are too scared to actually ask the questions. That's the biggest barrier that we feel, that people, heterosexual, whoever they are, that don't understand our community or aren't within our community, feel that they can't ask a question because there's a fear of offence, regardless if there's good or ill intent. And unfortunately, because we're in a society today where everything ends up on social media, people put bad experiences, they're the ones people remember. People don't always remember good experiences. So educators, healthcare professionals, anyone tend to feel like they can't ask the question if they really want to educate themselves and learn to do better. So that's why we say always ask the open questions, have that conversation, and if people don't want to share, then that's fine. But if they do, that's great too. And the biggest win, working with the NHS to create inclusive language, look at how our community is supported and our families, and getting organisations like them and to do better. People are starting to listen. There will always be discrimination, but unfortunately that's what we're here for, to dispel that and to educate people.
Thank you so much. Did you enjoy that? I'm really sorry that Laura Rose couldn't be with us. That was pre-recorded, and I found the presentation really, really useful. I will share with everyone who's registered for the conference the details of her organization. That's absolutely phenomenal. And I can see in the chat that people are saying that it's really helpful and they love it. That's absolutely brilliant. Right, so get ready for a great presentation. Thank you, Nizreen, was so good. Jawad is saying, I'm so pleased, really pleased. Thank you so much for being here. So we had a little poll at the beginning of the conference. We're asking where people were from, and it looks like we've got a lot of educators today in the room, so that's absolutely brilliant. I'd like now to invite the panel looking at a range of identities, and as if by magic, I've brought them up from the audience, and boom, shakalaka, boom, boom. If you would like to turn your video on, I'd like to invite Kate, Nisreen, Q-Ann, Rusi. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you so very much. I'm so super, super excited to have you. So shall we start with introduction? Rusi, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Rusi Jaspal, and I am a Professor of Psychology and the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Knowledge Exchange at the University of Brighton.
Thank you so much. Nisreen, أهلا بيك.
Hi, my name is Nisreen Fox, and I just graduated from the University of Sussex in a BA where I did a lot of campaigning there, and now I'm currently a master's student at the University of SOAS.
Thank you so much. Q Yan, am I saying your name properly?
Yeah, correct. My name is Q Yan, and I have born and raised in China, but now living in London. I set up the organization called Queer China UK. We want to provide the community support mainly for queer Chinese diaspora. And nice to meet you all here.
Thank you so much. And Kate, last but not least.
Hi, my name's Kate. I'm an associate professor at the University of East Anglia in the School of Education.
Thank you very, very much. So the first presentation is around how to foster a more inclusive platform for people in higher education. So Rusi, over to you.
Thank you, Laila. I'd like to share some slides. I'm just going to attempt to bring them up. So if you just bear with me one moment.
Thank you, Rusi. I'm not sure. Rusi, are you still there?
So Laila, yes, I'm using, sorry, it's making me log in because I'm using my iPad, you see, and it doesn't seem to be, yeah, it's the first time I'm doing this. So if you just bear with me 2 minutes. I think that the worst case scenario, if it's okay, I'll send my slides to you and perhaps you could display them at your end. Would that be possible?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's just try this.
Yeah, if you email them to me, I can share. Thank you for your patience. Don't you love being live? I absolutely love being live. This is the joy of live conferencing. So that's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
We have a break, Marzia said. Yes, have a break. Go and make yourself a cup of tea, people.
Open. Okay, this should work now, hopefully. Screen sharing has failed. Please try later. Laila, if it's okay, I shall send you my slides.
Yeah, send me your slide.
But not to worry, because I'm not going to take the whole 15 minutes. I'll probably just speak for 10 minutes. So everything should be on time. Right.
So I apologize to the delegate. Please be patient and thank you very much for your understanding. That's absolutely brilliant. If there's anything around LGBTIQ plus intersectionality that you're interested in, feel free to put the questions in the Q&A. Welcome back, Sabrina. You made it just in time. Fantastic.
So Laila, I've just sent you the slides, so hopefully they'll arrive momentarily.
Yes, I'm just checking my email right now. Yes, I've got them.
Thank you.
Boom shakalaka boom boom. I'm going to share my screen. I was going to experiment with a new feature of slide as a virtual background, but maybe not today. So there we go.
Great.
Let's start the slideshow. All right.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Laila. Thank you. And thank you very much to everybody, fellow panelists and members of the audience for attending on a Friday evening. I'm going to be talking briefly about how we can promote LGBTQ plus inclusivity in higher education. And really my approach will be two-pronged. First, I'd like to talk about the issues of identity, well-being, inclusion, both within society in general and specifically within higher education, and I'll be referring to staff and students. And then the second part of my presentation, I wish to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at the University of Brighton to try to promote LGBT inclusivity. So first of all, we have of course come a long way in tackling prejudice, but there remains much work to be done. I would argue that prejudice has not disappeared, despite the optimism, I think, that often surrounds discussions of prejudice reduction. But actually, prejudice often changes in the way in which it's manifested. So we talk of microaggressions, which can be more subtle forms of prejudice. In 2017, Stonewall analysed data from over 5,000 LGBT people in Britain. And actually, the results of their survey were quite disturbing. 1 in 5 LGBT people had experienced a hate crime or incident in the last 12 months. 2 in 5 trans people experienced such adversity. And the vast majority of anti-LGBT incidents simply didn't go reported. They were not reported. So people were afraid or expressed trepidation about actually reporting them. So they remained unresolved. And 36% of LGBT people reported feeling uncomfortable holding their partner's hand as just one expression of openness and about their sexual identity. And indeed, 58% of gay men reported this. So this just shows that prejudice remains a real challenge in our society. Next slide, please. Thank you. Prejudice and discrimination have also been shown to impact adversely on mental health outcomes. And this is often described in terms of minority stress in the psychological literature. So in a study that we conducted, we found that discrimination, rejection from significant others, so family members, parents, close friends, and victimization were all associated with poor mental health outcomes, specifically depression, anxiety, and also suicidal ideation. We've also found that the internalization of homonegativity, so that's different from experiencing homonegativity from other people. It's when one internalizes that feeling themselves, that this is also associated with distress. People who have internalized homonegativity tend to also report distress. And also when people recall a negative coming out experience, they also report greater distress than someone who is not recalling that experience. So it shows that even an isolated experience that is negative when one comes out can actually cause distress years after the initial event. And we found in our own research that LGBT people can experience what we describe as threats to their sense of identity because of situational factors like discrimination and so on. And it's key to bear in mind that these, in many cases, these factors are preventable. We can make a difference. We can promote positive social change to reduce the risk of poor mental health and to increase inclusivity. Next slide, please. So what about higher education in particular and the student experience? Well, first of all, it has been reported that students who identify as LGBT may often seek to escape from homophobic home communities, which have, quote, strictly regulated boundaries of acceptable, that is, heterosexual behavior. Now, this is an issue that I found in my own research to be particularly associated with people who are from ethnic minority backgrounds, who may experience real struggles in reconciling their ethnic and religious and sexual identities, who may not be out to their parents or to their significant others. But it is actually the case that a sizable proportion of people report homonegativity within school environments. And so they look towards university as being an environment where they anticipate acceptance and inclusion. A very recent report by UCAS and Stonewall found that 64% of LGBT students feel comfortable about being open about their identity at school, and that 82% are confident about being open about their sexual orientation or their gender at university. So, but what's really important, although this is quite high, there is, of course, a sizable proportion of students who do not feel comfortable being open about their sexual orientation or their gender, and that merits our attention. 1 in 10 people in the survey who said that they were unsure about how out they would be at university did so because they anticipated fear and prejudice. So it shows that experiences earlier on in life can often shape people's perceptions and anticipations about the future. Something that's repeated in this study, in studies about higher education, that's reflected also in society in general, is that bisexual students appear to be have less satisfactory outcomes. Indeed, they report less satisfaction with the student experience than lesbian and gay students, And also it's been found that trans students face a higher risk of abuse and physical assault, which is of course very concerning. Next slide, please. I also wanted to say a few words about LGBTQ plus staff. And now this is quite a dated report, but I thought it's useful for some context. The Equality Challenge Unit produced a report over 10 years ago based on survey data, and they found that just over a third of LGB staff were out to everyone. So that's the vast majority not being out to everyone, feeling concerned about being out, and that some were quite worried about the implications that outness could have for their employment status, exposure to homonegativity from students, and possibly this negatively impacting on their research that they're conducting. And it was also reported, discrimination was reported by LGBT staff taking various forms such as systematic institutional discrimination, but also implicit discrimination. So really the point of these slides is to show that it is misleading to believe that the university sector is entirely free of challenges for LGBT people. Many people are reporting these challenges, and so it's really important to promote inclusivity. Next slide, please. So I'd like to now talk about the Brighton experience and what we've been doing at the university to promote LGBTQ plus inclusivity. And the reason I'm doing this is just to share what I think is good practice, but also to exchange ideas and to look at how we might all think about and reflect upon what our own organizations or environments might be doing to promote this really important agenda. So just some highlights. Inclusivity is actually one of our, explicitly named as one of our 4 university values, and we take that very seriously indeed. At the university's LGBTQ plus equality champion is our director of HR, Julie Fryatt, who ensures that there is a focus on this agenda and ensures that it's woven into all aspects of the university's offer, both to students and to staff. We submitted to the 2019 Workplace Equality Index, and it's something that we plan to do for the next one. And we also have an action plan through the Stonewall Steering Group, which is representation from staff from all departments of the university, as well as the LGBTQ plus staff network. Turning to research, one of the leading research centres around gender and sexuality is based at the university, and it is the Centre for Transforming Sexuality and Gender. And we're very proud of that centre, and indeed it's one that we invest in as one of our centres for research and enterprise. And there are a limited number of centres that we have at the university. We also have, like many institutions, have a series of events that are planned for LGBT History Month. And we think it's really important that we have role models at the university that can also promote the well-being, the visibility, the rights of LGBTQ plus people. And indeed, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Deborah Humphreys, is an LGBTQ plus role model. Next slide, please. Now, I apologise for the size of the font here, but I'd just like to kind of home in a little bit on some specific activities that we've been undertaking around our academic offer. And I mentioned the Centre for Transforming Sexuality and Gender, which is led by Olu Jensen, but it actually has a postgraduate scholarship which supports gender diverse research, and it will also hold its inaugural postgraduate conference, which will be focused on some of the centre's activities, specifically celebrating postgraduate research in this area. Professor Nigel Sheriff leads the Health for LGBTI study, and it's funded externally, and it really shines a spotlight on health issues within the diverse LGBTQ plus community. So that's a little bit about research, but turning now specifically to our academic offer, Dr. Vedrana Velikovic has a module which is actually incorporated into the BA in Politics, Sexuality and Gender, which focuses on queer writings, and it addresses inclusivity explicitly and provides a safe space to discuss many issues relevant to the LGBTQ plus community. And Dr. Deborah Madden teaches on hidden histories and the historical exclusions of LGBTQ plus people in the historical archive. Now, the reason I've summarized some of these projects is because this is one way of promoting inclusivity and visibility by ensuring that LGBT lives, identities, well-being are very firmly on our curriculum and that they're part of our research agenda. Next slide, please, Lina. So just to offer some solutions. But we believe, I personally also believe, that diversity is one of the most significant assets that a university can possibly have. And it's something that we must capitalize on. And in order to capitalize on the strength of diversity, we have to celebrate diversity. And of course, Black History Month, LGBT History Month are opportunities for doing just that. But I firmly believe that every month of the year needs to be a celebration of diversity. And some of the initiatives that we have at the University of Brighton are our ways of doing precisely that. It's important to bear in mind that universities are a microcosm of society. There is unfortunately a view, an erroneous view, that prejudice doesn't and cannot occur in a university environment, but actually societal challenges are also university challenges. And we should therefore avoid making assumptions about identity, inclusion, and well-being within the university environment. We should always be critical, and we should always be very eagle-eyed about possible manifestations of prejudice, so that we can come up with ways of addressing this and making people feel included. We must continue to provide support structures for everyone, including our LGBTQ+ staff and students. And I think, for instance, staff networks is a very, very useful and positive mechanism for providing support also to our students as well, providing safe spaces. And also within our academic offer, when we have modules and we have particular degrees that are very much oriented towards exploring the lives of LGBTQ people in an affirmative manner, this is a safe space. This sends a very clear message that we celebrate these identities and we think these are topics that are worth studying and investing in. Indeed, I say that because I remember the very unfortunate days of when I, as an LGBTQ+ researcher, was trying to research issues around gay identity, and sometimes being told by colleagues that my work might not be funded. And so I might, try and put in an application that was less overt about LGBT identities. Thankfully, we're making great progress. And now courses like the ones that we offer, research centres like the ones that we support, send a clear message that we value and support pedagogy and research in these areas. So we must make our commitments clear, publicise them and commit to them. We have to translate what we say we're going to do into actual tangible action. And there's so much more that can be done. And when we teach, as I said, when we teach and research and celebrate LGBTQ+ lives, we are showing support for them. We're creating an inclusive space for people who identify as such. And I just want to end my presentation by emphasising one point that I haven't talked about in much detail, but that I alluded to earlier on. And that is that we must also remember that identities are inherently very complex. LGBTQ+ may be just one of many minority identities that an individual occupies. Many people also identify as ethnic minorities, religious minorities, people of faith, people of no faith. They may also be living with HIV, which can be construed as an identity. So it's very important that we don't work in silos, but that we work across boundaries, across identities to capture the complexity of identity. And only then will we truly be able to live up to our aspiration as a sector, actually, to be inclusive of everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Rusi. That was a really, really fascinating presentation. I'm really, really genuinely grateful. And I agree with you. Being in the closet is detrimental to one's mental health and prevents building meaningful relationship with people. I agree with you. I'm a lesbian 365 days a year, not just for History Month or Pride. And I'm really impressed by the initiatives done by Brighton University, how it's embedded into the curriculum. And zero tolerance is definitely the way forward. See something, say something, and we're all allies. So I'd like to invite people to ask questions and invite Chuyan from Queer China UK to comment on your presentation and talk about her organization.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I inspired by the presentation because like when you are in the second slide saying like the people, the LGBT people escape from homophobic family, like they go to the university, they expect inclusions. That's also like my experience. Why I want to come to UK, that's because I want to like escape from this quite high pressures, the families situation. That's why I came to here. But when during my as a graduate student and in London, I do feel our environment is not enough inclusive. That's why I want to like set up Queer China UK. We want Queer China UK become homes for the queer Chinese diasporas and our allies. Yeah, I want to share my screen. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I want to share more about the experience of like being LGBTQ plus and East Asians in education. And the last slide is a little bit about myself. And yeah, it says I set up the Queer China UK, and thence I also the litigant of China's first LGBTQ plus equal rights to education case. I initiate China's Say No to Homophobia textbook and all teacher out for LGBT student campaigns. That's why like I think that education is important. We had to like educate our society, the environment, the people about the LGBT inclusions. And now I started the Queer China UK 2 years ago. And because when I came here, I found there is not the queer Chinese community networks or support networks in UK. And currently the member in our network, they are like young people, and they are the like from mainland China, from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, or the British-born Chinese. The many of them, they are the international student, or some is the early careers professionals. And I want to share the problem or the challenges we face in our daily lives. I conclude several points. And the first point is the East Asia family usually uphold the traditional family values and like the conservative gender and sexual norms. Even though they are already like settled in UK many years ago, they still cannot accept the LGBT peoples. So it's quite hard for the like queer people to come out. Or I do some research. Almost none of the members in our network chose to come out when they are in school, especially the British-born Chinese, because like they live with their families. They are afraid that if they come out, their family will know it from other ways. So this has some struggle, has some conflict between the family and schools and their queer identities. The second point is about the low representation of queer East Asia in schools. When I was a graduate student, I joined some LGBT events hosted by Rainbow or LGBT Society Department and so on. And there is seldom Chinese face. Mostly I'm the only like Chinese person on the set because the language barrier and cultural difference, it was quite difficult for us to fit into the English conversations. And a lot of the events are in the pub is another barrier for me, because for me, I prefer the no alcohol environment, and I'm not good at drinking beers. And besides, like when we are looking at the curriculums, the queer East Asia also underrepresented. And we reading the readiness and the books, we cannot see ourselves in what we read and in what we learn. So also Professor Ruth mentioned the role models. That's the point that we cannot see ourselves, we cannot see the queer East Asia role model in what we learn. So it would bring the huge impacts on students' mental health vulnerabilities and their confidence buildings. The next point is about lack of cultural sensitivity in the support system. I believe many queer peoples will experience mental health problems, not just Asian peoples. When I was like in the depression situation, I cannot find my peer support network. That's why I come to the mental health support service. But it was a bad experience for me, because like during the conversation, I can realize they don't understand what it means to be LGBT and Chinese at the same time. They also don't have the idea of like the cultural background in East Asian societies. I understand they are very friendly. They want to they listen to me, but it's quite hard to keep this conversation going on, because you figure when you are like, your English is not good, you still have to like explain all the situation to the counselors. So it's quite hard for you like continue these conversations. And so in this points, I think the university can do more. They can like improve their system, how to put more LGBT and East Asia or like people of color, the perspective in their support system, in their like teachings, their school plannings. And the last point I want to share is about the intersectional identities. One interesting finding is that on the one hand, when in the Chinese student networks, we had to hide our queer identities. Like even though for the young people in the Chinese network, they will have some comments. We feel that like make us feel discriminated or uncomfortable. Like for example, they will say, "Oh, you are a gay or lesbian. It's okay. We don't discriminate against you." But some gay people are so high profile, which is not appropriate. Or they will say, because here is the West, so it's okay to be curious. But I think China is different. We have our traditional culture to maintain, etc. And on the other hand, when I feel it's quite depressed, so I join some Western queer groups. I think I can show my queer identity. I will feel safe. However, at that point, we might suffer from the racism or stereotypes. I think this situation is more obvious during the pandemic. So many the Asian hate crime happens. So to conclude, as a queer Chinese, we don't feel safe either in the Chinese student network or Western queer networks, or we also cannot really speak ourselves on both sides. And the next point I want to share is what I am doing now to improve these issues. And the first one, I want to break the language barriers, make resources accessible for queer Chinese diasporas. Like for example, we provide the decolonizing LGBT tour in Mandarin and Cantonese in the British Museum National Gallery, Western S. We also provide the translation in each event. And we also plan to translate some useful materials like the mental health highlights, some like safe entertainment values. And recently, we also plan to launch the Queerness of Chinatown Archive project to collect our heritage. The second is about the community buildings. And we provide some empowerment training, community art festivals, because I believe the activism is one of the solutions and be the change you want to see in the world. We are not just the victim. We are not just the disadvantaged groups. We are also the change makers. And the next one is Chinese LGBTQ plus society incubator program. One of our university's ambassadors, and she is planning setting up the LGBT East Asia Society in her university. So it inspired me to, we can have these incubator programs, because I think the queer East Asia societies on campus, actually it can help to improve the visibility of queer East Asia people. More importantly, the society can be the centers of all kinds of resources, which can link to wider support in and beyond the university. And that's why we are want to like continue this project, or we just start, so we do need support. And the last point I want to share is the facilitate greater communication and connectivities between queer Chinese diaspora and queer community from other ethnic backgrounds. I think the first is it can help to promote the mutual understandings. I think many discrimination come from the fact that we don't know each other's story. We don't know each other's experience. That's why I want to build a bridge between Western and East Asia queer communities. And in the past few months, we also had some like seminars, lecture about UK China queer dialogues. So some audience, they will leave some positive feedback. They will say through speakers, presentation, they can see the similarity. Our has some similar experience and difficulties, even though we are living in the different environments. The point is that we had to fight against the heterosexual hegemonies together. And the second point is about the solidarities. When we stand up, because I always educate my communities, when we stand up for our rights, when we stand up, like say, please pay attention to queer trans people, we also need to concern about other issues like the Black Lives Matter movements. We are not the only community who face the marginalizations. I love this sentence, so I share it with all of you. Who has your best and whose back do you have? And that's my sharings. Like if you are interested in my works or in my organization, feel free to contact me by email or ask me any question later.
Thank you so very much. I think we often, there is a lack of visibility within the LGBTIQA plus community of certain ethnicity. You're absolutely right. Some ethnicities are better represented than others. I've got a question for you. Like, do you sleep? It sounds like you're doing so much and there's so much work to be done. Do you want to put in the chat how people can contact you? Because you said you need help. So how can people help you?
Yeah, sure. I will leave my Gmail or some contact details. Because I just stop all the project, have some idea how to support the LGBT, because I just graduate. I also work for the education before in China. So this LGBT inclusive education is my passion. So I also to learn from other speaker. I also have some idea on how to, because I am not the researchers. I want to empower the student. They can be the change maker. They can do something, support the peer. That's my thinking. If you have some similar idea, we can share, or you have some useful material, you also can share to me. I can translate into Chinese to support the Chinese community.
Thank you so much. David Church is saying thanks, great work. I'm feeling inspired. Xavier Chan saying really incredible work. I'm so glad that you're speaking about the experience of queer East Asian individuals. As a queer East Asian individual myself, I'd love to connect with Queer China more to discuss this further. I'm absolutely delighted to see the kind of response that we're getting. And I want to thank you so very much for taking the time to contribute. And I hope that you continue to do the work. One of the things that really hit home for me is you were talking about the Asian increase in hate crime against the Asian community as a result of the pandemic. And I don't think it's something that people might necessarily be aware. And when you think about intersectionality, you're being discriminalized because of your race or ethnicity, but also because of your sexual orientation and gender identity. And there is a lot more work to be done to raise visibility of more marginalized communities, such as, people of East Asian heritage, as well as people from the Middle East and North Africa. And talking about the MENA region, I'd like to invite Nisreen, who has got phenomenal experience of being an activist on the ground. So Nisreen, welcome and thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing me. I don't have a presentation today. I'm just going to kind of be talking to everyone, and I really encourage people to write back in the chat and just kind of have a discussion. I'm so thankful as well for Rusi's speech. I think it's amazing to see a pro-vice chancellor actively wanting to make this happen in a university. It kind of made me wish I went to Brighton University, and Koyan as well for talking about everything which she does with Queer China. I think it's amazing, and I definitely have some friends who would be keen to help out and be part of a community. Yeah, so first I'll start with an introduction. So my name is Nisreen. I use they, she pronouns, and to visually describe myself, I'm wearing a white shirt with a black shirt underneath, and I have red dyed hair at the front, and I'm wearing my Palestinian keffiyeh tied back for those who are visually impaired. And I was born and raised in Geneva, Switzerland, to my mother who is Palestinian, Lebanese, and my father who is English. And I grew up in between Geneva and France, going to an international school there. And kind of growing up in an international environment was very much of a bubble, that I was one of the first people in my year group at 13 years old to come out of the closet. And this was a very interesting experience for me because, not only was I coming to terms with being queer, but I was also coming to terms with my identities, such as being Palestinian and Arab and Muslim as well. And luckily, I had an amazing mother who was super accepting. But in the school, I realized, we need to bring more attention into this, just like what this conference is talking about, having the pride in education, even from younger ages, not only in higher education. So when Peter Fatchell, a very amazing activist, came to my school to speak, I spoke to him afterwards, and I was saying to him, I would love to start an LGBT plus, network here in the school, like an after school club, something similar to how the other kids have like hockey or film club. But I wanted one for the queer kids in my school. And, I connected with a couple other people in my grade who had started to come out around the same time when we were about 15, 16. And we started the school's first LGBT plus alliance. And I think it was one of the first in the free campuses as well. And this was kind of very challenging, in terms of, we obviously didn't want to out students by having them, I think this is very important to note, by having them go home to their parents and having them sign permission slips which had the name of the club. So instead, I reached out to a dear teacher of mine, my English teacher, who was happy to represent the club and kind of pass it off as like an English workshop. But if students were out to their parents and felt comfortable, they were able to say that. And, the difference which I saw by having this LGBT plus club in the school, not only for myself as a student there, between 15, 16, 17, but the people who joined who were younger, who were like 12, 13 and older around this age, it was amazing. We were able to come together after class and just be ourselves and, talk about pronouns, learn about new sexualities. Everything was emerging in this time in the 2000s, and kind of learn where we fit in. And I went to a very diverse school as well, and there was a lot of ethnic minorities such as myself who were in our club. And I think this is really where I started to get the drive for activism and wanting to bring people together in a positive light. And this is one of the reasons I chose Brighton as well to go to University of Sussex for my BA, because of how much I heard about it being LGBTQ friendly. But sadly, coming here, even though the city is, very, gay and queer friendly, I realized after a while that it was friendly for those who are white and those who are, maybe not religious, or, not, as myself, Palestinian, or sometimes wear headscarves, or, my kifia. It's very friendly for, those whose identity is I'm, white and gay. And this is something which I sadly realized after trying to join the LGBT Alliance at my own university. It wasn't really a welcoming space for myself and others, friends who I connected through that, who are also BIPOCs who were LGBT plus as well. And so I realized that not only do we need a pride in education, but we need a decolonial pride. We need to have our queerness in education, which is decolonized, and have, sections of LGBT plus writers and academics, but not only white LGBT plus writers and academics, to appeal to those who have the identities of their intersectionality identities. And I was lucky enough to be part of Decolonize Sussex, which was an amazing campaign started by some dear friends of mine, which is all about decolonizing the curriculum. And there was also an aspect of queerness and decolonizing queerness in this campaign. And there was a campaign which came out of this called Put the Color Back into LGBTQ. And that was just so amazing to be part of, to kind of talk to our tutors and talk to our lecturers that, yes, we want the decolonial aspect, but not only have, for instance, a Middle Eastern person talk about the Middle East, and not only have, have a Black author or writer talk about Black Lives Matter, but we want there to be intersections, like where is the Middle Eastern media and writing on queerness, etc. All this, East Asian media and writing on queerness. This is something which we needed in our curriculum, which we're still fighting for to this day. And as I go to SOAS now, I'm continuing this and trying to find these intersections in my readings. And I think it's important to have this not only in your education and in your programs, especially as a student from my experience, but also to keep this up within your staff and your university's message. And I think something which can be fault in the university is putting out a false statement of support, but then not actually playing that or doing that in your own time. And it can become very dangerous. For instance, tutors or lecturers who might be coming out might have transphobic remarks, for instance, or homophobic remarks in their classes, the effect which this has on students, particularly trans students or queer students, or any students which can be discriminated against, is horrendous and will actually disadvantage them. They don't want to go to these classes anymore. They don't want to take part because of these teachers, which the university may stand by. But I think, we can look at this on the wider fact of higher education, and some of the work which I would love to continue doing is the decolonizing program of queerness in education. And also, I think it's important as well, this is something I was talking with Lila about, being Arab and Muslim myself is already identity in itself. And this is, I was very thankful to meet Lila at the Pink News networking event, where I asked about, I want to become a journalist. And I'm gay, I use, they, she pronouns, I'm queer, but I'm also Arab, I'm also Muslim, like I have all these other identities, I'm neurodivergent. How can I fit this all into one, conglomerate aspect? People aren't looking for, a queer Muslim neurodivergent Arab to be writing their articles. Maybe it's too much for them. I've had instances where I've pitched articles to certain news companies or news lines where I was like, oh, I want to talk about the experience of being queer and Arab and Muslim and all of that together, and using different pronouns and battling both identities. And they've said, like, this is too much for us, like we can't handle both of these aspects, it's too big. But I think, why is it too big? It shouldn't be too big. And that is the importance of the Pride in Education. That's what I want to focus on, not only the little things, but also having these ingrained into the institutions of educations across middle schools, preschools, kindergartens, universities, having that intersexuality, which I think is so important for all queer students, staff, teachers, members, and those who are learning from it and going out into the job sector. But yeah, I think this is what I want to say, get my message out there. And I do want to thank everyone for listening to me as well. And the opportunity to be on this panel is amazing. It's
Nisreen, I'm so happy to have you on board. And the comments in the chat are phenomenal. Like, people are saying really important points. Thank you so much for bringing these issues to light. I think it has to go beyond just inclusion and celebration. We need to start looking at decolonizing or having a more accurate representation of history. Perfect example right there at Sussex of university admin standing with staff who preach exclusion. So well articulated, having multiple parts of your identity can feel too much in so many institutions. People are agreeing with you. Amazing. Definitely very in students where universities like Sussex profit off a radical image but don't stand by their marginalized students. Somebody saying, yeah, beyond informative. Oh my God, the comments are just flooding.
Thank you everyone.
There was one question that I was going to ask you, because it's something that I've experienced myself, and I'm just wondering whether it's something that you have experienced. I don't feel like I'm super included in Black spaces because I'm not Black enough. I actually had someone telling me that I wasn't Black, and I'm like, well, Black is not a color. It's more for me a political identity, in the same way that queer is a political identity. And having spoken to people who are of Lebanese descent or Palestinian descent, who are, in inverted comma, white passing, is it something that you've experienced?
Well, I wouldn't personally identify as Black or brown, because I do feel like I do gain from white passing compared to my other Arab or Muslim peers who are darker than me as well. I definitely have a privilege in that, in my skin color and the way I'm perceived, especially because I'm mixed. So I haven't necessarily experienced this, but I do think it is important in ethnic spaces or Black and brown spaces, which include Arabs and Middle Easterns, to make sure that they also have the Middle Easterns who, because there are Black Arabs, there are brown Arabs, there's not only just light skin. I know Palestinians can be considered quite light skinned and some Lebanese considered light skinned, but personally I haven't experienced discrimination based on the color of my skin, mainly more about being Muslim and gay and or Muslim and queer, or even being Palestinian as well, just being outwardly Palestinian. I've experienced discrimination there, but I feel like it's not necessarily my place to speak on Black and brown Arabs experiences, because I am not one. I don't identify as one.
Thank you. Wow, I could talk to you forever, like
Thank you.
literally.
I would love to.
Yes, fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
People are saying, yes, saying Laila, it's really hard to navigate Black queer spaces as a mixed race. Yeah, it is something that as I identify as Black or brown, you know, but for me, Black is a political term. A new language is already born. I feel like is a peace language, but might because I am a pacifist. Marzia, thank you very much. I'd like now to invite our last but not least speaker, Kate, and we're looking at pre-teaching. So we had a look at the research and what a university can do, but doesn't it start with teacher training? What has your research shown?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really interesting to hear everybody's talks beforehand, and I really love the focus really on advocacy work, which I think hopefully I'll be able to explain how mine fits in with that as well. So I'm just going to share my screen too with everyone. Does that look okay? You haven't got my random screen there sharing?
No, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So my talk is based on a piece of research that came out this year that you might, if you're interested, you can find in the Journal of Gender and Education, and it's about exploring this idea of a borderland discourse, which I'm going to share with you, just to kind of give a bit of a framework to the work that I've actually done. And I'm sorry, I'm just starting my timer, so I know I'm not going to go over. So really, I'm really looking at the exploration of pre-service teachers, so that's trainee teachers. So I'm just using here the language that we would use in the Australian context to kind of make sense. So my contact details are just there. At the moment, I'm now at the University of East Anglia, but the work I conducted was when I was working at Sydney. So just to give a bit of a context to the study itself around the way in which gender and sexual diversity in teacher education in particular has been approached. So there has always been this kind of sense of understanding that really it's about how we might train people who want to become teachers to ensure that they have an LGBTQ plus focus in the work that they might do, in particular with the way in which they might work with their students in the future. So there's been a recent review that has been conducted, which is really insightful, but they have this kind of a hope position about the quality of the provision that's provided to trainee teachers in relation to this work, so that people might be able to recognise the opportunities for LGBTQ plus curriculum in their own classroom, how they might deal with homophobia and transphobia and ways of working in the school context. So, and I'll just kind of give a description of myself as well. Apologies for that if you're visually impaired. So I am a white cisgender woman who identifies as gay. I've got long hair, I don't know what colour you might call it, and I have blue eyes. So I'm just presenting to you today. But really, the problem with this type of work at the moment is that there's a really limited understanding of the experiences of trainee teachers who identify as LGBTQ+. And there is this kind of sense that queer trainees have a really different experience in relation to this idea, and it's been alluded to by some of the other speakers tonight already about whether or not they're perhaps out in the sense of who understands and who actually knows their identity and where they come from and how they would choose to be represented. This idea of the discursive silence, so the silences that are kind of presented as microaggressions around, in particular, sexual identity and sexuality identities, is kind of a way in which people feel quite limited in being out in that kind of sense. And also the fact that trainee teachers go off and work in schools which are often incredibly heteronormative and therefore very restrictive to the actual experience of anybody who's LGBTQ+, but in particular then for trainee teachers. And there is a particular context in the Australian context. So if you're not familiar with how Australia kind of works, that in many states, and in particular in the New South Wales state, religious schools can claim the right to refuse to hire or actually hire an employee on the basis of their sexuality or gender identity. So I was working with these trainee teachers who were working and operating in an incredibly difficult scenario, whereby being completely out about their status could mean that they were limited in terms of their work opportunities. So it's quite a unique context. And at the time of when I completed this work, there was no material at all in relation to Australian trainee teachers. There was one study in the UK, one study in Canada, one in the US, and one in New Zealand, but nothing in the Australian context. And I've employed this theoretical framework called the Borderland Discourse. And very simply, it looks at the role really of difficult conversations in between these two elements. So the story of me as the person and my own kind of self, and then the story of me becoming and being the actual teacher, and how those two coincide or not. And the idea here that a borderland discourse is where we actually have deliberately those difficult conversations for ourselves or in our peer groups about what's going to happen, how am I going to manage my identity, do I even need to do that, like what's the deal, all of those kind of questions that would come up. So the study that I did was to basically explore the role of gender and sexuality and how they might play in somebody becoming a teacher. I was able to work with 12 students who identified as LGBTQI, both in undergraduate and postgraduate teacher training contexts. The students were asked to identify themselves in the way that made them feel comfortable, and then I applied these borderland discourses to the data. So I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation now just trying to explore some of the findings from that data. And interestingly, talking about passing that we've just been having in this conversation, I think is a really relevant element to this too. So I'm conscious here of whether or not I should read out the actual quote. So I've decided that I'm going to try and give it a go, at least for a couple of these. So Greg, who identifies as a trans male, talked about passing as this privilege. So I've been trying to find research around out trans teachers because it's not something that I want to hide my whole life. I guess I have the privilege of passing. I've been taking hormones, I've had surgery and things like that. So it's easy for me to pass, but it's not something that I don't want to talk about, or I want to live as stealth. So I haven't had many conversations with people in my course about me being trans. He goes on to then say, I was talking about the rise of out transgender kids these days and the importance of having conversations that are inclusive of those identities in the classroom. I know a lot of transgender people don't have the privilege or the capacity or space to be able to be out, but I think it's important if people can, because that's the way that the change comes. So this is where the discourse, the borderland discourse really comes into play. He's kind of aware of these tensions of between him as the person and him as the teacher, and he wants to do things to give himself agency. However, that wasn't always the case. So Hattie, who identified as a lesbian, was also talking about the privilege of passing, but in a very different way. So again, I'll read this out. I asked her whether or not she thought it made any difference to her training experience. And she said, no, I don't think so. Like, I don't have short, spiky hair. I'm not like big and butch and stuff. If I look different, if I look like a man, if I were transgender or something, then maybe kids would talk and teachers would talk, talking behind your back, and I probably wouldn't feel very good about myself. And I say, but because you look, how would you describe your look? Oh, I don't know, normal. I don't look any particular way, but you don't feel you look lesbian? Yeah, like, I don't know, you tell me. I don't know, there are so many different sorts of lesbians. Exactly, but not to other people. They go lesbian if you've got lots of piercings and short spiky hair. And then I say, so because you don't hold to that stereotype, yeah, I'm not like I'm feministic but short fat little thing, you know, like that typical dyke looking person. So does that make it easier for you, do you think? Yeah, definitely, because I think if you look like that, which is fine, I think it would make it harder because people might talk. Hey, some people won't care what people think about, but I'd struggle with that. But because you look normal, yeah, normal, it wouldn't be an issue, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think my sexuality would come into teaching at all. So we've got two very different views around the privilege of passing, and Hattie here is not in that borderland discourse because she's not aware of the difficulties of kind of combining those two things. She's just kind of accepted that if she can pass, she should, and therefore it won't be a problem. The other key thing that's really obvious in much of the teacher education field is this idea of keeping the professional and the private completely kind of separate. So it's a kind of a mantra that kind of happens. So Anna kind of indicates here, you know, I'd never come out as a teacher. I would identify myself as just following the mainstream. I guess I'm very good at distancing myself from my personal and professional self in that way. Like when I'm a teacher, I present as heterosexual teacher. If I was asked, Miss, are you gay? I would say no. Or are you bisexual? I would say no, because that's what I feel I should say. I feel I shouldn't influence either way, even though that could potentially influence them to go down a straight line. I think if you do identify as being gay, I think you might get told, now we know you're gay, but this is the curriculum to follow. Don't let that influence your teaching. I think they might be warned against it. And then I asked, do you think that if someone was straight, that it would be the same conversation? No, because straight's normal. Being gay, bisexual, lesbian is not. Like, it does sound ridiculous. And then Greg also has another view about this. He says, I think there is a split between your personal and professional life, but I don't think it needs to be perhaps as strong. I think there's lots of internalized homophobia and transphobia that comes within that when people choose to silence things that are important to their lives. When someone, and I've inserted here, a heterosexual person, will come in and talk about their husband or their kids, and there's no issues around that. But there's a silence with what comes with not knowing how people will react to that, you know, myself being a trans person, and trying to protect yourself and perhaps your professional life. If someone was to outright ask me about things, I'm not going to hide, but it's just about reading when or how. You would have to be supported by the staff and the principal in the school to want to come out. I think that could be key. Otherwise, professionally, it could be quite dangerous. So he's really identifying, again, this sense of this awareness of this borderline kind of tension between things and the difficulty of kind of operating in that way. I'm not going to read this quote out because I know I'm really close to the time, but you might be able to read it in the time when I'm talking. Kath here kind of really identifies the absolute crux of the problem really for any queer identifying trainee teacher in the Australian context, is that if you're going to be applying for a job, you've got to keep that hidden. In particular, if you're operating in a faith-based school, and many of the students would be, because it's an incredibly popular kind of scenario, in particular in New South Wales, that if that becomes evident in any particular way, then you could easily not be offered that position. So there's a real kind of negative impact about this. So I know, and this is kind of like my final slide. So my conclusions really are that it's really this dissonance, the difficulty that the borderland discourse creates, that is actually the most transformative aspect of teacher education and about teacher identity work, about that deliberate look at you yourself as you, and then how that relates to you as the teacher. As teacher educators, we should all be engaging in those difficult conversations with everything that's actually going on. And then the other question for us as teacher educators is that should we really continue to keep espousing this idea that professionalism, it means being non-personal in any way? And if that's the case, why is this not experienced equally between both straight and their non-straight trainee teachers? And that's just the link then to my to the article for anybody who might want to do it. So I will stop there. I appreciate I've gone over time just a little bit there. Thank you for listening.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Kate. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that you said. The idea of passing can also be, it's viewed as something positive by some of the people who you interviewed. For me, it's the fact that people don't recognize me as a lesbian was the complete opposite, especially in queer spaces. I've had people say to me, "You're too pretty to be a lesbian," which is a form of microaggression. And this idea of what is normal and what is normal versus the norm. And what I say to people is like, I'm absolutely normal. I'm just not the norm. So just like a couple of points. What a fascinating presentation and piece of research. If you want to put the link in the chat so that people can access it, that would be absolutely fantastic. There's some comments here. It is hard. I've had parents a bit unhappy with me when they see some of my piercings, when they know that I'm Christian, as it is very uncommon in my area, but when they know that, when they know that there are LGBTQ+, I have found parents being very rude and even complain with the school and the university not supporting the individuals. Sadly, from experience, it has become something that many I know keep to themselves. This is from a trainee teacher. Thank you so very much. So I'd like to invite all of our panelists on Identities to come back on the screen. Rusi, I don't know whether you want to have the closing remarks before we move on to the next panel. So I'd like to thank Nisreen, if you want to come back. Yes, fantastic. And Qian, shall we do a screenshot of everybody? Because I think it's been such a fascinating panel that we can use for social media promotion. Get ready, smile. Thank you so much. So Rusi.
I'll be very brief. I just really wanted to say that, first of all, I've learned a great deal from today's session. It's been absolutely magnificent because I think we've really, done justice to the concept of identity by actually looking at how different, how diverse identities actually are, how they intersect with one another, how they play out in different contexts, the things that can really help us to have a positive sense of identity, the things that can threaten our sense of identity. And so I think that hopefully this will keep the conversation going, and there'll be many, many more prides in education. Of course, this is going to be a very successful one, just like the previous ones have been. But I hope this really continues to be the forum for discussing these really complex issues, Laila.
Thank you so much. We've got a question actually before I go into the wonderful Sarah Kedge and looking at neurodiversity. Can I ask, how would you recommend explaining the they them pronouns to children? Is it something that they're still trying to learn about? Super simple. My ex-partner was non-binary. My godson was 6 or 7 years old. And I just introduced my partner saying, this is so-and-so, and their pronouns are they, them. And they got it straight away, like there was no problems at all. And actually, when his mother misgendered my ex-partner, saying she instead of they, my godson, bless him, was like, no, it's not she, it's they. So children get it. There are more questions coming to the Q&A, and the panelists can respond by typing their answers. I'm very conscious of the time. So I want to thank you, Rusi, thank you, Kate, thank you, Nisreen, and thank you, Kuyen. You can switch off your camera, and then as by magic, we've got the phenomenal powerhouse that is Sarah Kedge. Sarah, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I can't start my video because you...
Can you start your video now?
I can. There I am.
Good to see you.
It's gorgeous to see you too. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you very much. So last but not least, we've kept you. So I want to apologize to the delegates who joined us late. Valentino is not able to join us, but they will be part of the next Pride in Education in June. I'm really sorry, but things happen, you know, especially around this time of year. So Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself, describe yourself, and tell us what you're going to be talking about?
Okay, my name's Sarah Kedge. I am, I have green hair, I have black glasses on, I have a black top on, I have white skin, and I'm going to talk to us about neuroinclusion in the curriculum, and then talk about the intersection between neurodivergence and LGBTQ+. Laila, is it okay if I share my screen?
Absolutely.
There we go. Here we go. You should be able to see this now.
Yes, perfect.
Fabulous. Okay. So my name's Sarah Kedge. I'm a coach, a management consultant, but I'm also a co-founder of the Neurodiverse Entrepreneurs Association. And what we do is we go into schools and we provide resources to help teachers and parents support their kids in working out how to be entrepreneurs. And the reason we've done this is because if you're a neurodivergent, you are 80% more likely to be self-employed than to have a career in a traditional corporate space. And one of the things we learned talking to people in my community is that nobody actually told us at any single point that not having a job was an option. Nobody told me that running my own business was an option. And so we have created a space and a series of products and services to go into schools to help with the careers guidance space. I also identify as queer, as does one of our other co-founders. And when we've been working, the intersection between the LGBTQ+ and neurodiversity is becoming even more profound. Now, if I start really at the beginning, we'll talk about, introduce what neurodiversity is for me. Neurodiversity includes autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ADHD, tic disorders, and acquired neurodivergence. So for me, that's the group of brains that that come under the banner of neurodivergence. And one of the things I want to sort of start with is that actually we're not that uncommon. Around 1 in 7 of us are neurodivergent. And when we're looking at the education environment, this actually means your teaching staff or your faculty members, as well as your students. And what's really interesting is that although 1 in 7 of us, and I think that's a conservative estimate, is neurodivergent, around 50% or half of the people, that's both adults and young people, are unaware of their neurodivergence. When I said that there's a large intersection between neurodivergence and LGBT+, there's been some recent research that says that around 60% of people who are on the autistic spectrum also identify as trans. And there's other bits of research that also says that although the population is 1 in 7 for neurodivergence, the intersection and the interrelationship between neurodiversity and being trans or on the LGBT is quite large. Now, there are debates around whether that's a genetic predisposition thing, or that as LGBTQ+ people, we've had to become aware of ourselves and think about how we think, how we interact in the world, how we present ourselves, which leads us into a space of being more aware of other things. So we might just be more aware than the general neurotypical population. The piece of language neurotypical means anybody who is not neurodivergent. Okay. One of the things about neurodiversity is that there is a lot of stuff in the press, and there is a feeling that neurodivergence is something new, that it's something that's happened recently. But actually, there is nothing new. There is a friend of mine, Helen, wrote a piece of research around complexities, cognitive complexities, and going right the way back to sort of we have evolved throughout history to have neurodivergence, and actually neurodivergent brains have a really important part to play in society and in the world. The reason I put underneath that, and we're not making it up, is because we do come across as neurodivergent people that some of our needs are made up, or that we get this quite often as an ADHD person. I'm both ADHD and profoundly dyspraxic, is that I am making it up. I'm just being difficult to be difficult. Trust me, I spend a lot of energy biscuits, and I spent a lot of energy biscuits during my life trying to behave normally, trying to be neurotypical, and I just fail. I just can't. My brain just works differently. And why I want to have a conversation with you around neuro-inclusion in your curriculum is that when we talk about inclusion in the curriculum, quite often when I talk to teachers, head teachers, schools managers, there's a sense that it's quite a difficult thing to do and quite complex. And in fact, I spoke to a teacher this week who was saying, we can't do more to be neuro-inclusive because Ofsted won't like it. And I want to really challenge some of that assumptions in the next few minutes that I've got with you. I'm just moving something so I can see the time. Okay. So for the first part, in terms of being neuro-inclusive, and this is where there's a real crossover between how you become inclusive for the LGBT space and for the neurodivergent space. And the first thing is know yourself and your colleagues. Start having a good think about yourself and about whether you are yourself neurodivergent. What are your needs? If you are neurodivergent, what reasonable adjustments do you need to be able to fully participate in the workspace? If it's not you and you are neurotypical, have a think about how you interact with your colleagues and whether there are things that you can do and things that you can alter, shift or amend to make their place in the workplace slightly more comfortable, slightly easier. So for me, when I'm in a workspace, there are some things that I find a lot easier, and I'm by no means representative of everybody, but I do find that working first thing early in the morning rather than later on, that's really useful for me. I find having pre-documents really useful. So when I go into meetings, I've had a chance to read and consider and think about things before going into a meeting. So there are some things which could be considered as good basic business practice that can help your neurotypical, your neurodivergent colleagues actually engage in the workplace slightly better. If it's you who have needs, so for example, you might find overhead lighting really distressing or really uncomfortable. For some autistic people, it can create visual disturbances or migraines. With my dyspraxia, I find noise around me really difficult. If that's you, or you have something that would make your ability to concentrate or focus in the workplace easier, how can you go about asking for that? How can you support that in other people? Now, when I was growing up, I was described as somebody who was incredibly distracted. I would do incredibly well if I just focused. In the classroom, I was the kid who the teacher said to me on a regular basis, put your hand down, Sarah, let somebody else have a turn. And for me, there is something around recognizing that kid in this classroom and recognizing that when you are describing the students that you have in your classroom, are you describing them as challenging? Are you describing me as being the pupil who won't be quiet, who won't focus, who won't pay attention, who on a regular basis when I was in the classroom would do something other than what was asked for me? Are you describing other pupils as withdrawn, as quiet, as hyper-focused on things, as incredibly focused on detail and won't see a bigger picture? Have a conversation in your head and start recognizing when you have behaviors that challenge you or that challenge the classroom environment. Is that an indicator that that person may be neurodivergent and maybe have support needs or learning needs that are different to the class, or you might need to adjust your approach slightly? When I was putting my hand up in the classroom, I wasn't trying to be difficult. When I was doing something that wasn't actually asked of me, I wasn't trying to be difficult. The pupil that sits in your classroom being really quiet and unable to answer the question is not difficult. One of my friends who's ADHD talked about when they were in the class at school, they were forever being chastised for not remembering to bring a pen into the class space. And from their ADHD, that was just something they could not manage to remember. But for their classroom experience and their school experience was punctuated and sort of memorable because they were always told off for forgetting to have a pen, even though it was something that they weren't able to control. And it wasn't something that somebody had actually said to them, is there a way around this? Because you seem not to be able to remember your pen. So please, when you are talking about your students, stop for a second and have a conversation in your head about whether how you're describing them is an indicator that there may be a learning or support need that's being unmet. Now, what do I mean by request to modify? As a neurodivergent person, I spent an enormous amount of my life trying to become neurotypical. I tried part of this, and I tried to be more focused. I tried to be on time. I tried to fit in with social norms and expectations because I was constantly being asked to be less than, to be different than. And every time I've had a request to modify my behavior, as you will do in your classroom spaces, put your hand down, Sarah, let somebody else have a turn. When you're saying these things, you are requesting of me as a neurodivergent person to alter my behavior to become neurotypical. And the challenge with that is that pretending to be neurotypical and fit in cost an enormous amount of energy. And that energy that I'm spending trying to be neurotypical is energy I then don't have to spend on my classroom and my studies. So quite often in my parents and teachers conversations, it was, Sarah would be okay at the beginning of the week, but by the end of the week, she was exhausted and was really grumpy. Well, no surprises there. By the end of the week, I'd spent a whole week not just trying to focus on my schoolwork and navigate being a school person, but I was navigating trying to pretend to fit in, or at least work out what social cues I was missing and how I could learn to be more like everybody else. So when you're in the classroom space and when you're talking to yourself, have a conversation and think about, what are you asking that person to do? Is it the behavior that is challenging you? Is it telling you something? So for me, putting my hand up constantly, there was a need for me to be excited. I was excited about something. And is there a way that you can harness that in the classroom space? If you've got a person who hyperfixates, as some autistic people can become very focused on a subject or a particular area, how can you support your learning environment to make that a superpower or something that you can draw out that young person? One of the important things when talking about neurodiversity in the workspace is, or in workplace and in the school place, is that we fixate quite often on the diagnosis element. At the moment, in the UK, the NHS waiting list for an ADHD assessment is around 3 years. The assessment for autism, the threshold to get an assessment for autism is so high that anybody attending mainstream schooling is unlikely to meet that threshold. So when we take that into the context of the classroom, remembering that 1 in 7 of us are neurodivergent, the likelihood that a young person who's experiencing ADHD or dyslexia is unlikely to be able to get a diagnosis in a reasonable amount of time. My stepchild is 9 years old, and we're currently going through the challenges of trying to get a diagnosis. By the time we get a diagnosis, if we follow the NHS, she will be 13, at which point she will have missed the last bits of her secondary education and into the first bits of her secondary education. All the time not being given the tools necessary to be able to focus and thrive and concentrate on her learning. So although diagnosis is an important tool and can be useful not only for our own journey of understanding and being aware of our behaviour and how we can support ourselves to function, to thrive and to explore the world, but it's not necessary. When we're in an education space, we often put children into a SEND department. And again, talking about my stepdaughter, she doesn't have access to a SEND department because she doesn't have a formal diagnosis. Yet it's unquestionable that this young person has reading differences. She has different ability in terms of telling the time and organising her thoughts and her work. So it's not, so I want to encourage you to think in terms of the classroom and in terms of, are you putting your thing on, Lila, because I'm running out of time? No, is to think about whether diagnosis is necessary for you to think about in how you operate in your classroom, and whether there are things that you can do. And I can help people if they have questions about how you might neuro-include on a very specific basis. I can do this, and this is one of the things the Neurodivergent Entrepreneurs Association can do with you. But how can you support that young person who has reading difficulties, for example, to learn in a slightly different way, pending their diagnosis, if that's what they choose? The brilliant thing about this is that when you start to shift your perspective in terms of how do I include these young people, and then start listening to what the behaviours are telling me, how I start to understand their difficulties and start thinking about if I include them or shift how I'm delivering my education and my teaching in a slightly different way, it makes your life easier as teachers and practitioners. It helps your classrooms to thrive. And actually, one of the things around inclusive, and I think we'd agree here, that actually if we make a world more inclusive, it benefits everybody, not just the people who would identify as being ND or LGBTQ+. If we create an environment which is more inclusive, that we listen and respond to needs as they are being expressed, we're able to be more responsive and be able to support the learning of the young people and adults that we're working with. This is this is slightly more contentious, and I'm coming towards the end. One of the things I do is I lecture at Oxford Brookes University on their business and management programme. And I've been teaching for the last 5 years, and I really absolutely love it. one of my permanent and continuing frustrations is that there are young people or young adults in my lecture theatres who are neurodivergent because they have a blue card. The first time I find out about these young people being neurodivergent is when they have handed their assignments in and they put their blue card on the front of their assignment. Now, as somebody who preaches this stuff, I can become really aware and I can sort of listen and I can look and I can pay attention to my students and who I've got in my room. But for those people who are in a different place in their journey around neurodivergence, the first time they become aware that they may have somebody with a neurodivergence is at the point that they have the assignment handed in. And that blue card only tells me that there is a learning difference. It doesn't tell me whether it's autism, whether it's dyslexia, whether it's dyspraxia or ADHD. It just tells me that there is a learning difference. And that doesn't help me in marking my work. Now, I'm aware, so I can start thinking about how I can teach differently and how I can mark differently. But what I'm trying to ask, and for those of you in this room who are in management spaces, is to think about how you are operating either your SEND departments or your blue card schemes. Are they being tools to facilitate learning? Are they othering these young people, separating them out where it's not necessary? And are they facilitating learning and supporting them to thrive and be the best that they can be? And I'm unfortunately, there are very few schools that I've come across so far that have really got a department in the SEND space where they are coming at it from a how do we include these neurodivergent people into mainstream education? And I don't want to pick on the SEND professionals who work in the departments because they often work in poorly resourced spaces with very large numbers of young people. But there is an opportunity to think really carefully about and more broadly about how you operate your SEND department and whether you can turn them from being spaces of taking young people out of the mainstream classroom or creating difficulties to being tools of learning and to facilitate growth in young people. So, and to conclude, because I'm aware that I'm coming very rapidly towards the end of my time, for me, I would ask you and I would encourage you that when you have somebody who's neurodivergent in your classroom or your learning space, or they're a colleague of yours, to focus on the things that their neurodivergence does really well. And when I talked about Helen and talking about cognitive complexities, what Helen describes in her paper is around how my ADHD brain has got real strengths attached to it. I can hyperfocus and I can have a massive burst of energy. When I'm hyperfocusing, I can get more work done in an hour than my neurotypical colleagues can do probably in 2 or 3 days. Because that's what my neurodivergence affords me. I may not be able to pay attention for very long, but I can hyperfocus. My autistic friends, many of them have ability to retain information and a very detailed focus. It's their superpower. So I would encourage you, when you're working with neurodivergent people, to think about the things that neurodivergence gives us as much as the stuff that's challenging. I would encourage you to, on the back of this, to explore a little bit more about the world of neurodivergence and just explore it. There are many of us out here. There's lots of amazing resources out there. If anybody's interested, drop me an email. I'll be happy to send you on some. Learn more. Dyslexia, my stepdaughter is one of the things we're having a problem with because their school that she's at finds dyslexia as a problem with reading. Well, actually, dyslexia is much more than just reading or writing. So there is a responsibility to educate ourselves and learn a bit more. Talk to some neurodivergent people. We're often quite happy to talk about it. And the last thing is and I encourage this when I'm talking to people about LGBTQ+, sometimes it's okay to ask, not the personal impertinent questions, but ask, I understand your ADHD, how can I help you? listen, and then experiment with your pupils, encourage them to experiment. I understand that you're finding it really difficult to get to class on time. How might we do this differently? And then use it as an opportunity to experiment. And I would encourage you, if you do think you're neurodivergent, to also experiment with yourselves, because there is something amazing about having a neurodivergent brain. And yes, I would encourage you to experiment. And I'm going to stop there. That's it. That's me. And I've gone a little bit over, Lila. I'm really sorry.
So don't apologize, because honestly, I thought your presentation was so fascinating and really, really, I love the idea of looking at neurodiversity as a superpower. Like, absolutely love this. The comments are fascinating.
Yeah, some people don't enjoy the use of understanding neurodivergence in terms of superpowers, because they find that quite infantilizing sometimes and difficult words. But I think for me, it's a really useful piece of language to get people who aren't aware to recognize that actually neurodivergence. My stepdaughter, quite dyslexic, but her ability to do creative stuff is amazing, incredibly creative, wonderful. Anyway, carry on.
No, thank you. I mean, you know, I'm a fan anyway. I would encourage you to follow Sarah Kedge on social media, on LinkedIn. Your posts always inspire me, makes me smile, and really get me thinking. I didn't know about the blue card. I mean, when I used to, and that was only like a couple of years ago, where I was still a curriculum manager, we didn't have that system. But I think you're asking the right question. First of all, have you got something in place to be able to identify and support? And if you have, how are you using it? I think these are totally the right questions. So thank you for inspiring me yet again. So I'm absolutely delighted to have had you on board. I want to thank everyone for coming and attending. This is being recorded. It'll be edited and uploaded on YouTube. And I've just dropped in the chat a very, very simple survey so that you can tell us what you liked about the conference. This is our 4th one now. But also, what are you going to do? So you came to the conference, and so what? So there's individual pledges and organizational pledges. We've had over 700 pledges since the beginning of the conferences last year in June, and people are saying, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. And if you need any help with implementing your pledges, then there's an option for us to contact you, so that if you need training or you want to get in touch with one of the panelists, you can. So that's, please complete the survey in your own time. It'll be emailed to everybody who's attended with the link to the video. Tomorrow, I am super excited because tomorrow the theme is planning and resources. So we're going to kick off with a conversation with one of the major publishers in the world, Pearson, and I'm going to ask them some very, very challenging questions around how do you support people where you are being published in countries where LGBTIQ+ are criminalized and persecuted. So yes, I'm very interested to hear what they're going to say. Then we're looking at Ollie and his fantastic age-appropriate book. There's Meet the Authors. There's how to create trans safe and affirming spaces for trans and non-binary people. If you haven't seen the program, which I don't think so, because you've all must have seen it in order to be here. So if you have you got any questions for Sarah, or shall we? Grazie de fondo mi corazon, mega cool webinar. You're very welcome. Marcia said thank you from the bottom of my heart. Mega cool webinar. We've had people from the Middle East, and let me just check the poll results. So we had people from North America, the UK, the European Union, the Middle East, the Sub-Saharan African region, Australasia, and 25% of the delegates were students, 58 educators or educational leaders, authors, parents, librarian, historian, archive, researcher, and most of the people who attended the webinar identified as being part of the LGBTIQI+ community, 63%. In fact, So fantastic. I just want to thank you all so very much for spending your Friday morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world with us. I hope you can join us tomorrow. It's going to be a very long day for me, but I love it. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Sarah. Bye, everyone. Have a fantastic day, morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Thank you. And hope to see you tomorrow. And complete the survey. Boom, shakalaka, boom, boom. There we go.
See you soon. Take care, my darling. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.